When I was a kid, we used to sing a hymn almost every Sunday called The Love of God. And the old hymn said that if the oceans were filled with ink and every stalk on earth a quill, if the skies were made of parchment and every man on earth were a scribe, to write the love of God would drain the oceans, nor could the parchment contain the whole. It's a love we can't fathom in our earthly minds. My name is Aaron. I'm part of the teaching team here at Daily Church, along with Matthew and Rachel. Appreciate you being with us this morning. We've been going through a series looking at some Sunday school stories that are a little more applicable than we might have thought back in the day when we were taught these stories, if you were brought in up through those stories. And if not, you're hearing these stories for the first time, hopefully you can see the impact and why they've been included in the Bible. Last week we looked at the book of Daniel. We looked at Daniel in the lion's den in chapter 6, a man who refused to compromise his faith, even when the cost was his life. He faced the lion's den. Daniel prayed when others told him to stop. He trusted when others hid. And God shut the mouths of the lions. This week, we're turning back a few chapters to Daniel chapter 3, and we're going to meet a few of Daniel's friends, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who faced a different test of faith, but with the same question. Will we remain faithful when the pressure is on? You should know that both of these stories come out of Israel's exile. Around 650 BC, Babylon conquered Jerusalem, and King Nebuchadnezzar, who oversaw Babylon, destroyed the temple again and carried away Israel's brightest young leaders. And so Babylon conquers Jerusalem and takes some of its brightest men from Jerusalem to come to Babylon to help advise. Those four men that they refer to here are Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Now, you should know those are their Hebrew names. Daniel is renamed Belteshazzar, but you don't see that name very used often. Obviously, the Bible book is written as Daniel. But the other three men, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, are actually renamed Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and you'll see their names used in Daniel chapter 3. Know that these men were trained to serve Babylon, but they belonged to God in their hearts. These were his chosen people who had once again been taken captive and moved to Babylon to serve pagan gods and pagan people, but their hearts still belong to God. And Daniel's story shows us the faith that kneels when the world says stop praying. And their story, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, shows us faith that stands when the world says bow down. Both are stories of conviction and courage and God's presence in the middle of danger. Well, let's start in Daniel chapter 3, starting in verse 1. Read the first part of this story. It says, King Nebuchadnezzar made an image of gold, 60 cubits high and 6 cubits wide, and set it up on the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. He then summoned the satraps, which you heard Rachel talk about, they're kind of government figures, prefects, governors, advisors, treasurers, judges, magistrates, and all the other provincial officials to come to the dedication of the image he had set up. So all the bigwigs are in town. Everybody who's anybody has been brought here to this large golden statue. So the satraps, prefects, governors, advisors, treasurers, judges, magistrates, and all the other provincial officials assembled for the dedication of the image that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. And they stood before it. Then the herald loudly proclaimed, nations and peoples of every language, this is what you are commanded to do. As soon as you hear the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, pipe, and all kinds of music, you must fall down and worship the image of gold that King Nebuchadnezzar has set up. Whoever does not fall down and worship will immediately be thrown into a blazing furnace. Therefore, as soon as they heard the sound of the music, all the nations and peoples of every language fell down and worshiped the image of gold that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. So I want you to picture for just a moment this golden statue that's about 90 feet tall. It'll be about 9-story building, about the height of many of the buildings that you'd see in downtown here. Probably not anything larger than that or a large apartment building, but very large, golden piece that sits in the middle of the desert sun, visible for miles. It was a monument to pride and power. See, Nebuchadnezzar had been conquering many lands, and he was full of himself. He had a lot of pride, and he believed that he was untouchable. And so he built this monument to really worship kind of his accomplishments. And his simple demand was, bow or burn. You will bow to the idol to show your allegiance to me in my pride and my power, or you will burn. For most, bowing was simple. Remember, everybody there, different tongues, different languages, different cultures, including other people from Jerusalem who had been brought there, who also should have had their hearts turned toward God, had no problem bowing. For most, bowing was simple. It meant safety. It meant belonging. It meant not sticking out, not looking different, and certainly not facing the furnace. But for God's people, bowing would be betrayal. You see, the first commandment in Exodus chapter 20 says, you shall have no other gods before me. You shall not make for yourself an image. You shall not bow down to them or worship them. This was a command given to them. I'm going to tell you this, as though we no longer face the furnace or face golden statues, the call to bow still echoes. The music, it's still playing. It's the soundtrack of our culture. It's what we are inundated with every day, every speaker and every screen and every schedule. You don't have time for God. Your calendar is your God. You can't rest. Your value depends on being busy. Change who you are so people will like you. Don't offend anyone with your faith. Keep it private. Compromise a little. It's not a big deal. You don't need the church. You can do this by yourself. Money will make you secure. If you don't post it, it didn't happen. Success is being noticed, not being faithful. Sex, comfort, and pleasure are what you really need. Politics will save the world. Trust your side, not your savior. Appearance matters more than character. If it feels right, it must be right. You deserve it. Truth is whatever you feel. Forgive? Never. Get even always. Hold tighter to what's yours so others don't take it. You're too broken for God to use. Don't wait on God's timing. Make it happen yourself. Faith is fine in private, but keep it out of the public. That's the music of Babylon, still playing today. All of us hear these things every single day. Different instruments, same tune. And if we're not careful, we start to nod along to the music. And then we start to see our heads bow a little bit. And little by little, we're on our knees bowing to the things of this world. Every heart bows to something. The question isn't if, it's to whom or what. Faith calls us to stand when the world kneels. See, the world's trying to get you to be convinced that if you just kneel and go along, that life will be better for you. What are you worshiping today that is distracting you from praising the one who is worthy of your praise? What are you bowing to in your life that's keeping you away from the one who truly deserves all the honor and all the praise? We talked about the song this morning, this love of God that's indescribable, that's not even understandable, but is something coming between you and the ability to commit to him fully. Is it a job, a career, a relationship? What's causing you to bow to something else rather than to your God? Let's continue the story in chapter 3 and verse 8. At this time, some astrologers came forward and denounced the Jews. By the way, they're tattling, just to put it in layman's terms. They said to King Nebuchadnezzar, "May the king live forever. Your majesty has issued a decree that everyone who hears the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, pipe, and all kinds of music must fall down and worship the image of God, and that whoever does not fall down and worship will be thrown into a blazing furnace. But there are some Jews, just so you know, King, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who pay no attention to you, your majesty. They neither serve your gods nor worship the image of gold you have set up. Now, I should tell you right now that Darius felt very much in favor of Daniel. He loved Daniel. He was perplexed by what happened with the lion's den and being duped into creating a law that would cause Daniel to be tossed in. Nebuchadnezzar could not care less who these three men are. He has no feelings for them at all. He does not care who they are or what position they're in or where they came from. He does not care. And it goes on to say, furious with rage, Nebuchadnezzar summoned them and said, if you're ready to fall down when you hear the music, very good. But if you do not, you'll be thrown immediately into the blazing furnace. Then what God will be able to rescue you from my hand? Ooh. Would not want to be Nebuchadnezzar at that moment. So he says, basically, you got a second chance. I'm not going to throw you in the furnace yet, even though I said I would. I'm going to give you one more chance. We're going to play the music one more time, and then you guys are going to bow, right? Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego replied, absolutely, king, thanks for the second chance. Just kidding. That's a different story. King Nebuchadnezzar, we do not need to defend ourselves before you in this matter. Ooh. They told the king, I don't answer to you. You ever had the enemy whisper in your ear, try to make you feel guilty about something you know that God has forgiven you for? You know what you say to him? We do not need to defend ourselves before you in this matter. I only answer to one person. If we are thrown into the blazing furnace, the God we serve is able to deliver us from it. Notice he didn't say the God we serve will deliver us. He said he's able to deliver us. And he will deliver us from your majesty's hand. But even if he does not, we want you to know, your majesty, that we will not serve your gods or worship the image of gold you've set up. Those words, but even if he does not, are the heartbeat of real faith, true faith. They knew God could deliver them. They believed God would deliver them, but their obedience did not depend on the outcome. Think about that kind of obedience for just a moment. That I believe that God is the supreme being in my life. My relation to him is number one. Everything and every person belongs to him. All of the earth will worship him, even if he does not do what I want. They didn't worship God for what he might do. They worshiped him for who he was and who he is. That's an even if faith. Do you have an even if faith? The kind of faith that doesn't need proof, only presence. The kind that says, I don't follow him because of what he gives me. I follow him because of who he is. Even if God doesn't answer my prayer the way I want, I still believe he hears me. Even if the healing doesn't come, I will still call him my healer. Even if the relationship falls apart, I will still call him faithful. Even if the job is lost, I will still say he's my provider. Even if the storm doesn't stop, I will still trust that he's in the boat. Even if I don't understand, I will still surrender. Even if the miracle doesn't come, I will still trust his purpose. Even if I lose everything the world can offer, I still have him, and he's enough. I've said so many times to people that sometimes you have to lose everything to realize Jesus is the only thing you need. That is not weak faith. That is refined faith. That is the kind of faith that can walk through fire without being burned. Do you have even if faith? So maybe you're not bowing to other things. Maybe you are finding yourself totally devoted to him, but the bad thing hasn't happened yet. The unanswered prayer hasn't come. The situation hasn't gotten tough yet. The question is, what will you do when that happens? Will you have even if faith, or will you say it's all God's fault, or I don't trust him anymore? You see, faith in good times is not faith, it's called fortune. When God puts you through the toughness of life, when things happen that God is completely capable of stopping, because they believed he was capable, but they knew that it might not be his will that that happened. But even if he didn't, they were going to be able to worship him instead. Can you do that? Can you say, even if this happens or this doesn't happen, I can still see God as my protector and my provider? Then there's the presence in the fire. Moving on to Daniel chapter 3 and verse 19. You see, Daniel tells us this story about these men that he came from Jerusalem with. And he believed that these men were children of God, called according to his purpose. And yet here they were in the fire. It says, then King Nebuchadnezzar was furious with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and his attitude toward them changed. He ordered the furnace heated 7 times hotter than usual and commanded some of the strongest soldiers in his armies to tie up the 3 men and throw them into the blazing furnace. The king's command was so urgent and the furnace so hot that the flames killed the soldiers who took them up. And these 3 men, firmly tied, fell into the blazing furnace. Then King Nebuchadnezzar leaped to his feet in amazement and asked his advisors, weren't there 3 men that we tied up and threw into the fire? They replied, certainly, your majesty. He said, look, I see 4 men walking around in the fire, unbound and unharmed, and the 4th looks like the Son of God, without a touch, without a scratch, without a binding. Be assured, the fire surrounded them. It was real. The guards who threw them in died because the flames were so hot. But it could not consume them because God's presence was with them and was their protection. If you are a child of the Most High God and you've been washed in his blood, you are protected from the flames. You are not exempt from the flames, though. You will find yourself in the flames. You will find yourself in the furnace. You see, the Son of God was there with him as the 4th man. He could have done that when the idol was happening. He did not have to wait for them to get thrown into the furnace to show up. But he did because he wanted to show them that he was the living God. And all the people, thousands, hundreds of thousands, who were there at the bottom of that golden idol watched as Jesus delivered these men, as the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego brought them out of the furnace unharmed, untouched, and walking around like nothing had happened. It surrounded them, but it couldn't consume them because God was protecting them. Isaiah 43:2 says, when you walk through the fire, you will not be burned. The flames will not set you ablaze. John 16:33 says, in this world you will have trouble. You will have trouble. You will have trouble. Not you might. You could stumble on it. It says you will have trouble. But take heart. I have overcome the world. Who's I? It's Jesus talking to his disciples. I have overcome the world. He didn't say to Timothy, hey, you might run into some problems. He said, you will surely be despised. The fire was not their punishment. It was their platform. It revealed not what they believed about God, but who they belonged to. I don't have to prove God to anyone else, but I do want them to know that I belong to him. God does not need to defend himself to anyone, especially me. But I want others to know that I belong to him. It showed that when you're covered by his Spirit, what should destroy you can only refine you. That doesn't mean it's easy to be standing in front of all those people being bound hand and foot and thrown into the flames, watching these men die in front of you, thinking that is your own reality. But they went in bound and they came out free. They went in alone, but they came out accompanied. They went in surrounded by enemies, but came out surrounded by witnesses. They went in under the commander of the king, but came out under the covering of the King of Kings. They went wrapped in ropes, but they came out wrapped in glory, carrying fear, but walking out in faith. They went in thrown down. They came out standing tall. They went in as victims, but they came out as victors. They went in hidden by the smoke, but came out shining in the presence of God. There's always another in the fire, and his name is Jesus. These men went into the worst moment of their lives, but came out with the greatest revelation of who God is. Can you imagine one day in heaven saying to them, what was the furnace like? What were you thinking? How were you feeling? We don't hear from these three men in this story. We just know that they came out, and then Daniel moves on. We trust that there's something that's happening. But imagine. Now imagine you're Daniel. 3 chapters later, many years later, King Darius is now in charge, still in exile. Now Daniel is being thrown in a lion's den. I can't help but believe that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were around still. And I have to imagine when they heard that Daniel, their friend, was being thrown in the lion's den, they were probably thinking, that's not really a big deal for God. I mean, we went through the furnace. I mean, not saying anything else, Daniel, but like, they're lions, whatever. They had no concern for their friend, I promise you, because they knew that God would save him. And even if he did not, they would still be faithful. He's not just deliver us from the fire, he's our Redeemer in the fire. He won't just pull you out, he'll walk you through. He didn't just save my life, he changed my story. And when you see him in the middle of your furnace, you'll see things completely different. Lastly, the power of a faithful witness. The last few verses of Daniel chapter 3, Nebuchadnezzar says, "Praise be to the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who has sent his angel and rescued his servants. They trusted in him, and he defied the king's command, and were willing to give up their lives rather than serve or worship any god except their own God. Therefore, I decree that the people of any nation or language who say anything against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego be cut in pieces and their houses reduced to rubble. For no other God can save in this way." Then the king promoted Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the province of Babylon. What? They went through the furnace. They came out. Hundreds of thousands of people watched this. And the king said, all right, I was wrong. There is a God who you can serve, who genuinely is a living God, who does deserve to be worshiped and praised, and no one else is allowed to say a bad word about him, ever again, or I will cut them in pieces and burn their houses down. I think he meant that. And then he promotes them. There's a whole message right there in that verse. I'm not even going to go there today, but I'm going to tell you this. Sometimes hindsight is the only time we can see this, but we often find ourselves in the furnace just before God wants to do something really great with us. I'm not telling you that's true every time, but I am telling you that there are times when that furnace has a purpose, and sometimes it doesn't feel like it when you're in the middle of it, but I promise you, their faith turned into a pulpit. The courage became their testimony. They did not need to defend God. They just trusted him, and he revealed himself. What was meant to humiliate them became a platform to glorify God. What was designed to destroy them became the place where God displayed his power. The same fire that others feared. All the other Jews who were there that day bowed, even though they knew what the commandment said. They watched these three men stand for their faith. And what was designed to destroy them became the very place that God proved his power. When they walked out, everyone who saw them knew this was not human strength. They knew this was not human endurance. There was no human explanation. This was the hand of the living God. Because faith that stands firm when the fire burns brightest cannot be silenced. Faith that refuses to bow becomes a beacon for all of us. Faith that trusts without answers preaches a louder sermon than we ever could. When I watch a saint go through a very difficult time, walk through a furnace, and I hear them say, I trust God, I believe God, and whatever his purpose is, I still trust him. It is a hard place to be, but that's real faith. Nebuchadnezzar's decree had forced people to bow to an idol, but when the witness of these three faithful men caused his empire to lift its eyes to the one true God. When you refuse to bow, someone else finds the courage to rise as well. When you trust him in your suffering, the world sees that your God is real. Because again, if you only trust God in the good times, that's a genie. Your faith can turn your pain into a pulpit. Your courage can make a crisis into a testimony. Your endurance can make your trial the evidence of his glory. Because every time one of us stands tall in the fire, the light of heaven breaks through and others see. The faith that stands even in those even if moments shines brighter than any sermon that I could say up here. It reminds the world that our hope is in God, not in what this world has to offer. And it's not in what God does, but in who God is. We don't love him because of what he does. We love him because he's the creator, because he's the one who breathed life into us, because he's the one who knows the number of hairs in our head, even when they're dwindling. It declares, even when the fire rages, our God still reigns. But I want to remind you, this faith does not promise escape from the heat. Never at any moment did Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego have a belief that they weren't going into that furnace if that's what the king wanted. But they knew that no matter what happened, whether they died and received their eternal reward, or whether God delivered them from that, he was the same God. Sometimes God delivers us from the fire. Sometimes he delivers us through the fire. But he will never abandon you in the fire. You're going to hear whispers from people when the flames roar. You have to remember who God is. And remember, you do not need to defend God to any of them. He walks with you through the smoke so others can see his light. He's protecting you in the very place the enemy wants to try to destroy you. He's transforming your pain into purpose and your tears into triumph if you will just let him. He covers you so completely that even when you come out, there's not a trace of smoke on you. That's a God I can't comprehend, but it says his ways confound the wise. And I don't count myself as wise, so they certainly confound me. The same God who shut the mouths of lions for Daniel 3 chapters later, walked through the fire with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, is still walking with you. So when the heat rises, when your heart trembles, when your faith feels small, when you feel alone, when you feel like nobody cares, when you feel like the fire can't get any hotter, stand firm and say, even if God does not change my circumstance, he will still be my God. Because there's always another in this fire, and his name is Jesus. Would you stand with me? I want to pray. Father God, we're so unworthy. I don't think we can comprehend just how unworthy we are. Father, you have smiled upon us with your grace. You sent your Son to take our place. And long before he came to this earth, he was protecting your children in the fire in Daniel chapter 3. How we don't understand why we're in the middle of this blaze, nor do you owe us that explanation. But today there are folks here who are bowing to the wrong things, and they need to give them up. They need to let those things go so that they can have a full and right relationship with you before ever facing those flames. There are those here today who are struggling with that even if faith. Maybe been through the fire already, maybe going through it now, maybe just entering the flames. But God, would you help remind them that you never leave them and you never forsake them, but you go with them all the way to the end. And that even if they're not delivered from the flames, it doesn't change who you are as God. And God, today, would you give them that peace that passes understanding? And Father, if those of us who need to stand today, who need to come to you and say, I'll do whatever it takes. I'll stand in the gap. I'll walk through the fire. God, I pray today you would just stir in their hearts and in their minds. For it's in your name we pray. Amen. This altar is open. God is here. If you need to let go of something that you're bowing to, if you need to tell God that you want to, even if faith, you want to build a relationship with him that sees through it all, this is the place. If you have any business at all to do with God, if you just want to come and thank him for being who he is to you, this is a great place to do it. If you want to take communion, it's available. If you need just time to communicate with God about how he's feeling, how you're feeling after hearing this story for the first time through a new set of eyes, do that. But please don't leave here today being unchanged in some way.